Hey, it's Matt. Welcome to Storycrafting. When I started out, I was starting to write. I started writing a lot of stage plays, um, and strange stage plays. I really tried to do things in a very inexpensive, cheap way because I assumed that if I was going to write a play, no one else was going to be able to publish this or do it. I was going to have to do this on my own, and I didn't have any money. So I just wrote things that had as few props and costumes as possible and could be done on like no budget and no set. It was later on that I started to learn about screenwriting and started to learn about structure, which I am a very big structure guy. And what I started to realize is that while structure for screenplays and stage plays can be very similar, there are some things that are really, really different. One of the first things are scenes. If you are writing a scene in a movie or in a screenplay for film, TV, 9 times out of 10, you're going to want to have your scenes a little bit on the shorter side, right? Um, you don't have to. Again, there are no rules to this, but you're going to have a lot of different, when this gets done, a lot of different camera angles. You're going to have cutaways. You're going to have all of these things. And usually you want to have your scenes a little bit shorter to move on to the next place. Now, when you're doing a stage play, chances are, unless you're doing a multi bajillion dollar show, you're not going to have a lot of time to move back and forth to actually different locations with different backdrops. So the scenes themselves are going to tend to be a little bit longer. Because remember, stage is going to be an audio medium. An audience means they're going to be listening, right? Whereas TV and film, that's a viewing thing. That's why it's more of a director's medium, because it's about telling things in a series of pictures. So if you're writing a play, you keep the exact same character motivations and dialogue that you would if you were doing a screenplay, but keeping in mind that you need to fill that out a little bit longer, right? And of course, there are fantastic plays that are just a couple of people on stage, real time from beginning to end, which are phenomenal. I have not done many of those my personal self, um, but it's a really interesting way to think about time, to think about character, to think about intention. If you are new to this, I would also recommend having a shorter length play. This is just a personal thing for me. This has nothing to do with industry standard or anything. This is just me. I'll tell you why. Um, when you go to some of the big theater houses, I live in Los Angeles, so there's a place called the Pantages, and this is where kind of the bus and truck tours of Broadway shows and some of these really gigantic shows come through, where you're going to have a very big first act, and then there's going to be an intermission, there's going to be another big act, there's going to be a lot going on, which is great. I love these shows. But I'm also active in the smaller theater scene. And I've been a part of something called the Hollywood Fringe for a while. And the Hollywood Fringe works the same way that a film festival works, which is you would go into a theater to see a play, and you would leave, and there's another play that's going to be at another theater next door, and you might go in and see that, and you can pop in and out. Especially when these are new plays, right? It is very, very useful to keep them on the shorter side, 45 to 90 minutes. Why is that? Especially when you are working out a story, right? It is very easy to overwrite. You may be repeating beats that you don't recognize. Having a way to say, I am going to write 60 pages and that is going to be my stage play. It's also a really good way to make sure that you hold your audience. One of the first plays that I wrote professionally when I was out here that I produced, it was approximately an hour, but I had an intermission set in the middle because it was a mystery. And as we were in production, I realized there's no reason to have an intermission. People can handle sitting for an hour in a theater, and you are actually going to get more out of that by letting people just experience something in that 1 hour. Also, I've had shows where they're very, very long, and having an intermission, that's an opportunity for people to leave the theater. And that's one of the worst feelings ever. Not that it's ever happened to me. The other reason that I recommend starting to write some plays, in addition to writing your screenplays, is control. You may not want to do more than be a writer, and that's totally fine. One of the things that I discovered, though, is when you're writing screenplays, when you're writing something that needs a gigantic group of people to bring your vision to life, especially if you're writing something sci-fi, where you're going to have to sell your screenplay in order for someone to put $100 to $200 million to see the final product, there's a lot of people waiting in that line. Your chances are pretty small, and that has nothing to do with whether you are any good or not. It's just the realities of the business. However, if you would like to see something that you've created come to fruition, if you can limit yourself, which is a great creative exercise, by the way, limit yourself and say, I am going to write something that includes X number of characters in one location, 2 locations, whatever it may be. And I'm going to see how I can get these characters to interact and how interesting I can get this to be. If you have something like that, you can get that to a director, to a producer, to a festival, and get it produced for far cheaper than it would ever take to even film it. Now you've got a chance to see your work fully realized in front of an audience. That's a really cool feeling. It's really neat. And I'm a huge proponent of theater because I think there's something when you are in the seat and there are live actors on stage, that feeling and that give and take is totally different than going to see a movie. But again, for me, I think that control over saying, I've worked really, really hard on this story and I want people to see these characters and I want them to hear this story. That is a much more reasonable, actionable way to see your work. So, what do you think? Anybody done any playwriting? What is the difference that you find between playwriting and screenwriting? And has anybody done some stuff recently? Anybody put up any shows? What was your experience with that? What was your experience, if you've done this a number of times, with the first time that you wrote a play and had it go up, or the first time you wrote a short film and had that made? Let me know in the comments. Obviously, subscribe, click that bell for notifications, and come back soon. I'll talk to you. Right on.